On a Wednesday morning in June of 1976, a 29-year-old farmer named Kevin Bradshaw did something he'd been planning for months. He loaded his father's 1952 Farmall M onto a trailer, drove it to the John Deere dealership in Hastings, Nebraska, and traded it in toward the down payment on a brand-new John Deere 4230. The dealer gave him $1,200 for the Farmall, a tractor that had been on the Bradshaw farm for 24 years, that Kevin's father had bought used in 1952 for $800. That had plowed every acre of their 240-acre operation at least twice, that had never missed a season, never been in the shop for anything Kevin's father couldn't fix himself. $1,200. And the dealer was probably being generous given the tractor's age and condition. Kevin felt proud, like he was finally dragging the farm into the modern era. His father, Raymond Bradshaw, was in town that morning at a doctor's appointment and didn't know the trade had happened. By the time Raymond found out, around 11 o'clock when he got home and saw the new green tractor sitting where the Farmall should have been, Kevin was already in the field planting soybeans with equipment that made him feel like he'd stepped into the future. What Raymond did next became legendary in Adams County, and the lesson it taught is something every farmer needs to understand before they make a decision they can't undo. Before I explain exactly what Raymond Bradshaw did when he discovered his Farmall was gone, you need to understand the relationship between a farmer and his equipment, especially equipment that's been part of the operation for decades. This isn't like trading in a car. A tractor that's been on a farm for 24 years isn't just a machine. It's a tool that's shaped to the land, that the farmer knows intimately, that represents thousands of hours of labor and dozens of successful harvests. Raymond had bought that Farmall M in 1952, right after coming home from Korea. He'd been farming with his father's old John Deere B, which was worn out and barely functional, and he needed something more capable. The Farmall M, produced by International Harvester starting in 1939, was a workhorse, approximately 40 horsepower, four-cylinder gasoline engine, simple and robust design. The one Raymond bought had been used hard by its previous owner, but it was mechanically sound and the price was right. Over 24 years, Raymond had rebuilt that tractor 3 times. He'd replaced the sleeves and pistons in 1959 after pushing it too hard during a wet harvest and running it low on oil. He'd overhauled the transmission in 1967 when second gear started grinding. He'd rebuilt the magneto, replaced the carburetor twice, fabricated new bushings for the steering, welded cracks in the frame, and repainted it once in 1963, though the paint had long since faded and chipped away to bare metal in places. He knew every quirk of that machine. He knew it ran hot if you worked it hard in third gear for more than an hour. He knew the clutch engaged a little high, and you had to feather it carefully when pulling heavy loads. He knew the starter occasionally stuck, and you had to tap it with a hammer to get it to engage. These weren't problems to Raymond. They were characteristics. The Farmall was like an old friend with annoying habits you'd learn to work around. His son, Kevin, saw it differently. Kevin had grown up farming with that Farmall, and he was tired of it, tired of the uncomfortable metal seat that left him sore after long days, tired of no cab, no protection from sun or rain or dust, tired of the manual steering that fought you on every turn, tired of the relatively low horsepower that meant everything took longer than it should. Kevin had gone to agricultural college at the University of Nebraska in the late 60s, and he'd been taught by professors and extension agents that modern farming required modern equipment. He'd visited other farms and seen John Deere 4020s and 4430s with enclosed cabs, power steering, and diesel engines that produced 2 or 3 times the horsepower of the old Farmall. He'd felt embarrassment when his college friends asked what equipment his family ran, and he had to admit they were still using a tractor from the early 1950s. The tension between father and son had been building for years. Raymond was 62 in 1976, still strong and capable, but started to think about stepping back and letting Kevin take over more of the operation. Kevin wanted that responsibility, but felt hamstrung by what he considered antiquated equipment. They'd had the argument a dozen times. "Dad, we need to modernize. That Farmall is 25 years old. We're wasting time and money running it." Raymond's response was always the same. "That tractor works fine. We don't owe any money on it. When it finally dies, we'll talk about replacing it. Until then, we run what we've got." But in early 1976, Kevin made a decision. His father had given him more autonomy over farm decisions as Raymond's health had started declining. Nothing serious, just age and we're catching up, some arthritis, some back problems. Kevin interpreted this autonomy as permission to make equipment decisions. He went to the John Deere dealer in Hastings, a man named Gerald Hutchins who'd been selling tractors in Adams County for 15 years. Gerald showed Kevin a new 4,230, 90 horsepower, turbocharged diesel, 8-speed power shift transmission, enclosed cab with heat and air conditioning. Beautiful machine. Price, $38,000. Kevin didn't have $38,000. The farm had maybe $6,000 in the bank, saved slowly over years of conservative operation. But Gerald had a solution. Trade in that old Farmall. I'll give you $1,200 for it. Put down $4,000 cash. Finance the rest over 7 years at 8.75%. Your payment will be about $600 a month. Kevin ran the numbers. The 240 acres they farmed, planted mostly to corn and soybeans, had been netting around $18,000 to $20,000 per year after expenses. An additional $7,000 in annual equipment payments seemed steep but manageable, especially if the new tractors' increased efficiency allowed them to rent additional land or reduce labor costs. Kevin convinced himself this was a sound business decision. He also convinced himself that his father would understand once he saw the new tractor in action. He was wrong on both counts. The morning Kevin made the trade, he told his mother where he was going, but asked her not to mention it to his father. I want it to be a surprise, he said. His mother, Helen, had a bad feeling about this but didn't interfere. She'd learned over 40 years of marriage that her husband had strong feelings about debt and equipment, and she suspected this surprise was going to go badly. Kevin loaded the Farmall onto the trailer early, before his father woke up, and was at the dealership when it opened at 7 a.m. Gerald Hutchins walked around the Farmall, noting the worn tires, the faded paint, the oil seepage around the valve cover gasket, the dented fenders. I can give you $1,000, Gerald said. Kevin negotiated him up to $1,200, signed the paperwork, and drove home with a gleaming John Deere 4230 on the trailer behind his pickup. Raymond was at the doctor's office in town, getting his blood pressure checked, when Kevin unloaded the new tractor and parked it in the equipment shed where the Farmall had sat for 24 years. Kevin hooked up the planter and headed to the back 40 to finish the soybean planting they'd started the week before. He was in the field, running the 4230, marveling at the smooth power and the comfortable cab. When his father got home around 11, Raymond pulled into the farmyard in his 1968 Chevy pickup and immediately knew something was wrong. The equipment shed door was open, and where the Farmall should have been, there was an empty space. He climbed out of the truck, his knees stiff, and walked into the shed. Empty. He stood there for a long moment, feeling something rise in his chest that was part anger, part grief, part disbelief. He walked to the house and found Helen in the kitchen. Where's the Farmall? Helen looked at him, and he could see in her eyes that she knew. Kevin traded it. He bought a new John Deere. Raymond didn't say anything. He turned and walked back outside, got in his pickup, and drove out to the back 40. Kevin saw his father's truck coming across the field and felt his stomach tighten. He'd known this confrontation was coming, but he'd hoped to have at least a day to demonstrate the new tractor's capabilities before having to defend the purchase. He stopped the 4,230 mid-row, shut it down, and climbed out of the cab. Raymond got out of his truck and walked toward him, moving slowly, his face unreadable. They stood facing each other in the middle of the soybean field, the new tractor gleaming in the June sun behind Kevin. Where's my Farmall? Raymond's voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd been yelling. Kevin took a breath. I traded it toward this 4230. Dad, look at this machine. Cab, power steering, 3 times the horsepower. Where is it? Raymond interrupted. At the dealership in Hastings. Dad, listen, you had no right. Kevin's face flushed. You said I could make operation decisions. We needed better equipment. That Farmall was ancient. That Farmall was paid for. Raymond's voice rose for the first time. That Farmall has never cost me more than a couple $100 a year in maintenance. That Farmall was mine, Kevin. Mine, not yours to sell. Kevin felt defensive anger rising. You gave me responsibility for the farm. I made a business decision. This tractor will increase our productivity. How much did you finance? Kevin hesitated. $32,800. 7-year note. Raymond went pale. You put $33,000 of debt on this farm for a tractor? It's an investment. We'll make it back and increase efficiency. We'll make it back. Raymond's laugh was bitter. You just committed us to $600 a month in payments for 7 years. Do you understand what that means? That's $7,200 a year. That's nearly 40% of our net income. For what? So you can sit in an air-conditioned cab instead of getting a little sun on your neck. The argument escalated. Kevin accused his father of being stuck in the past, of refusing to adapt, of holding back the farm's potential. Raymond accused Kevin of being reckless, of not understanding the value of financial independence, of making decisions without consultation. It ended with Raymond getting back in his truck and driving away without another word. Kevin, shaken and angry, climbed back into the 4230 and tried to focus on planting. But his hands were trembling and his mind was racing. Maybe he'd miscalculated. Maybe he should have talked to his father first. But it was done now. The Farmall was gone. The 4230 was here. They'd make it work. Raymond drove straight to Hastings, 23 miles, his mind churning. The Farmall represented something more than just a tractor to him. It represented 24 years of work without debt, 24 years of maintaining independence, 24 years of not owing anyone anything. He'd bought it with cash saved from 2 years of brutally hard work after coming home from the war. He'd kept it running through skill and stubbornness. And now his son had traded it away like it was worthless. For a machine that looked impressive but came with a chain attached, a chain of payments that would tie them to the bank for 7 years. He pulled into the John Deere dealership parking lot and walked into the showroom. Gerald Hutchins looked up from his desk, and his smile faltered when he saw Raymond's expression. Mr. Bradshaw, I was just processing the paperwork on your son's purchase. Beautiful tractor, that 4230. He's going to be very happy. Where's my Farmall? Gerald blinked. The Farmall, M? It's out back. We haven't processed it yet. I want it back. Gerald's smile disappeared completely. Sir, your son traded it in. It's part of the transaction. My son didn't have authority to trade that tractor. I own the farm. I own the equipment. That trade wasn't authorized. Gerald looked uncomfortable. This was delicate territory. Mr. Bradshaw, Kevin signed all the paperwork. He represented himself as having authority to make the purchase. If there's a dispute between you and your son, that's a family matter. But legally, the transaction is complete. Raymond reached into his pocket and pulled out his checkbook. How much do I need to pay you to get that Farmall back? Gerald hesitated. Well, we credited him $1,200 toward the down payment. But now it's dealership property, and there are costs associated. How much? $1,500. It was highway robbery, and they both knew it. Gerald was adding $300 for basically storing the tractor for 3 hours. But Raymond didn't argue. He wrote the check, his handwriting shaky with anger or emotion, or both. I also want you to cancel the sale of the 4230. Gerald shook his head. I can't do that. The contract is signed. The financing is approved. The tractor's been delivered. Raymond's jaw tightened. That tractor was financed under my son's signature, but it's my farm, my collateral. I'm telling you right now, I'm not co-signing any loan. When the bank realizes the title owner won't guarantee the note, they'll pull the financing. Gerald's face went carefully neutral. Mr. Bradshaw, I understand you're upset, but you need to work this out with your son. I'm just a dealer. Raymond leaned forward. I don't need to work anything out. I'm taking my Farmall, and you're going to have a problem when that $4,230 note doesn't get paid. Have a good day, Gerald. Raymond walked out to the back lot, found the Farmall sitting near the fence, and felt a wave of relief. It looked the same as it had that morning, worn, weathered, but intact. He fired it up. It started on a second try like always, and drove out a lot onto the highway and headed home. The trip took nearly an hour at the Farmall's top speed of about 15 miles per hour. Cars passed him, a few honking. Raymond didn't care. He kept his hands on the wheel, feeling the familiar vibration of the engine, smelling the familiar scent of hot oil and exhaust. And by the time he pulled into a farmyard, he'd made several decisions about the future. Kevin was in the house when he heard the distinctive sound of the Farmall's engine. He looked out the window and couldn't believe what he was seeing. His father was driving the Farmall across the yard, parking it in its usual spot in the equipment shed. Kevin ran outside. "What are you doing?" "I traded that." Raymond shut down the tractor and climbed off slowly. "I bought it back." "You what?" "Paid $1,500 to Gerald Hutchins. It's home where it belongs." Kevin felt like the ground was shifting under him. "You had no right. That was my decision." "And this is mine." Raymond cut him off. "This is still my farm, Kevin. The deed is in my name. The bank accounts are in my name. You work here, and I've given you a lot of responsibility. But you don't get to make $33,000 decisions without talking to me first." Kevin's face was red. "The 4230 is already here. The paperwork is signed. You can't just undo it." Raymond nodded. "You're right about the paperwork being signed. But the financing requires a guarantee from the landowner. That's me, and I'm not signing it, which means the bank won't approve the loan, which means Gerald Hutchins is going to be calling you in about 24 hours to discuss returning the 4230. Kevin stared at his father. "You're sabotaging this." "I'm protecting this farm," Raymond said quietly. "You made a decision that would put us $33,000 in debt for a tractor we don't need. I'm undoing that decision. You can be angry about it if you want, but that's how it is." Kevin didn't speak to his father for the rest of the day. He worked in the field, seething, using the 4230 while he still could. That evening, Gerald Hutchins called. The bank had indeed flagged the loan, requiring Raymond's signature as the property owner. Without it, they wouldn't fund the purchase. Gerald asked if they could work something out. Kevin, his voice hollow, said he'd return the tractor in morning. The next day, Kevin drove the 4230 back to the dealership, less than 24 hours after bringing it home. Gerald tried to minimize the damage, only charge him $100 as a restocking fee, and return most of the down payment. Kevin drove home in his pickup, feeling humiliated and angry. But over the next few weeks, something shifted. He kept farming with the Farmall. And as his anger cooled, he started to pay attention to things he'd overlooked. The tractor did work. It was slower than the 4230, less comfortable, less powerful. But it worked, and it cost him almost nothing to operate. He began to understand what his father had been trying to tell him. Then, in late July, a neighbor named Frank Morrison lost his farm. Frank was a good farmer, hard-working, smart. But he borrowed heavily in the early 70s to expand. New equipment, additional land, modern facilities. When commodity prices dropped and interest rates rose, he couldn't service the debt. The bank foreclosed. Frank's auction was held on a Saturday morning, and it seemed like half the county showed up. Kevin attended with his father. They watched as Frank's John Deere 4430, only 3 years old, beautiful condition, sold for $28,000. Frank had financed $45,000 to buy it new. He still owed $37,000 after 3 years of payments. The auction sale didn't even cover the loan. Frank lost a tractor and still owed the bank $9,000. Kevin and Raymond stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. Raymond said quietly, "That could have been us if I'd signed that loan guarantee. One bad year, one price drop, and we'd be standing where Frank is." Kevin swallowed hard. "I didn't understand." "I know," Raymond said, "but now you do." They drove home in silence. And when they got back to the farm, Kevin did something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. He asked his father to teach him how to rebuild the Farmall's carburetor. They spent the afternoon in the equipment shed, Raymond showing Kevin the same skills his own father had taught him, how to disassemble the carburetor without losing the tiny springs and screws, how to clean the jets with carb cleaner and compressed air, how to set the float level correctly, how to adjust the mixture screws. As they worked, Raymond talked. Not lecturing, just sharing. "This tractor is simple. For cylinders, a magneto, a carburetor, a transmission with gears instead of hydraulics. There's maybe 20 things that can break, and I can fix 19 of them myself. That 4230 you brought home? Beautiful machine. But it's got a turbocharger, electronic controls, hydraulic systems I don't understand. When it breaks, and it will break, Kevin, they all do, you're at the dealer's mercy. Could be a $500 repair. Could be $5,000. And you can't fix it yourself because you don't have the tools or the training or the parts. You're dependent. And dependence in farming is dangerous. Kevin listened. Really listened for the first time. So we just never upgrade? Never modernize? Raymond shook his head. I didn't say that. I said we don't finance equipment. If you want a newer tractor, we save for it. Takes longer, but when we buy it, it's ours. No payments. No bank calling if we have a bad year. You want to know the secret to surviving in farming. Kevin nodded. You make sure that when the bad years come, and they always do, you can afford to keep farming. The way you do that is by not owing money. The minute you owe money, you lose control. The bank owns you. And they don't care about your family or your land or your future. They care about payments. Over the next few years, Kevin learned to appreciate what they had. He got better at maintaining the Farmall. Started seeing it not as an embarrassment, but as a tool that had proven its value over decades. He learned to farm efficiently with older equipment, and he saved money. By 1982, when the farm crisis was in full swing and foreclosures were happening across Nebraska weekly, the Bradshaw farm was one of the few in Adams County that wasn't under stress. They had no debt. They owned their land free and clear. They ran the same old equipment, but it was paid for. When other farmers were losing sleep over loan payments they couldn't make, Raymond and Kevin slept fine. In 1985, Raymond officially retired and deeded the farm to Kevin. They sat in the lawyer's office, signing papers, and afterward Raymond said, "The farm is yours now. Run it however you want. But remember what I taught you." Kevin looked at his father. Never finance equipment. Raymond smiled. Never finance equipment. Now, let me explain why this story matters beyond one family in Nebraska. What Raymond did. Buying back that Farmall, refusing to guarantee the loan, forcing his son to return the new tractor. It looked like stubbornness or old-fashioned thinking or even cruelty. Kevin certainly saw it that way at the time. But Raymond understood something crucial that Kevin didn't yet understand. In farming, flexibility is survival, and debt destroys flexibility. When you owe money, you lose options. You can't afford to have a bad year. You can't afford major repairs. You can't afford price drops or weather disasters. You're locked into a treadmill where you have to generate enough revenue every single year to service debt. And if you can't, you lose everything. The Bradshaw farm survived the 1980s crisis because they had no equipment debt and no land debt. When corn prices dropped to $1.80 per bushel and their net income fell to $12,000 for the year, they tightened their belts and survived. They couldn't have made a $7,000 annual equipment payment on $12,000 of income. Nobody could, but they didn't have to. The Farmall kept running. The farm kept operating. And when the crisis passed and prices recovered, they were still there. According to USDA data, over 235,000 farms failed between 1980 and 1987. The common denominator wasn't lack of skill or poor land or bad luck. It was debt, specifically equipment debt and land debt taken on during the boom years of the early 70s, when everyone believed prices would stay high forever. The farms that survived had low debt loads. That's the whole pattern. High debt plus bad conditions equals failure. Low debt plus bad conditions equals survival. Let me bring this into modern context. Today, equipment debt is even more dangerous because the numbers are so much larger. A new tractor can cost $500,000. A combine can cost $700,000. Young farmers are told this is normal, that everyone finances equipment, that you can't compete without the latest technology. But the math hasn't changed. If you owe $6,000 a month in equipment payments, which is what you pay on a $500,000 tractor financed over 10 years, you need to generate at least $72,000 a year just to cover that one obligation. before operating costs, before land payments, before living expenses. That's an enormous fixed cost that doesn't care about drought or price drops or equipment failures. Compare that to farming with a 20-year-old tractor that's paid for. Maybe it breaks down more often. Maybe it's slower, less efficient, less comfortable. But when it breaks, you're looking at a $500 repair, not a $5,000 dealer bill. And most importantly, if you have a terrible year, you can afford to fix it and keep farming. The guy with the $500,000 tractor and the $6,000 monthly payment, if he has a terrible year, he's done. He can't make the payment. The bank takes the equipment, and often the land with it. I spent 2 weeks researching this story. I interviewed farmers who lived through the 80s crisis. I reviewed agricultural lending data from that era. I talked to retired equipment dealers about the trade-in practices and financing programs of the 70s. And I studied the patterns of farm survival and failure during the crisis. The conclusion is undeniable. The farms that stayed out of equipment debt were the farms that survived. The farms that borrowed heavily from modern equipment were disproportionately the farms that failed. Kevin Bradshaw, now 77 years old, still farms at 240-acre operation. He runs newer equipment now, a 2005 John Deere 7420 that he bought used in 2015 for cash. But the philosophy hasn't changed. No equipment debt, ever. He told me something that stuck with me. My dad buying back that Farmall was the best thing that ever happened to me. At the time, I thought it was the worst. I was humiliated. I thought he was being unreasonable. But he saved my future. If that 4230 had stayed, if I had made those payments for a few years and then hit the 80s crisis, I'd have lost the farm. No question. Dad knew that. I didn't. And he loved me enough to embarrass me and make me angry rather than let me destroy what our family had built. The 1952 Farmall M is still on the Bradshaw farm. By the way, it sits in an equipment shed, fully restored, still functional. Kevin rebuilt it completely in the 1990s as a tribute to his father. It's 72 years old now. It's outlasted the 4230 Kevin tried to buy, which has probably been scrapped or is rusting in someone's backlot. The Farmall is slower, weaker, outdated by every modern standard. But it doesn't owe anyone money. And it's still there, still part of a farm that's been debt-free for 70 years, because one stubborn old man understood that financial independence matters more than impressive equipment. If you're farming or thinking about getting into farming or advising someone who is, learn from Raymond Bradshaw. Don't finance equipment. Save for it. Buy used. Buy old. Run it until it can't be fixed anymore. And when someone tries to tell you that you're falling behind, that you need to modernize, that everyone finances equipment, remember Frank Morrison standing at his own auction watching his life get sold off. Remember Carl Hoffman losing his farm because he listened to his neighbor's advice about buying new tractors. Remember Kevin Bradshaw, angry and humiliated, driving a brand new tractor back to the dealership because his father refused to sign a loan guarantee. And remember that all of them, the ones who survived, have one thing in common. They got out of debt or stayed out of debt or were forced out of debt by someone who loved them enough to make the hard choice. If this story resonates with you, share it in the comments. Tell us about the equipment decisions your family made, the debt they took on or avoided, the lessons they learned. And if you think this message matters, hit subscribe. This channel exists to preserve agricultural history and document the lessons that can save farms and families. Every video takes weeks of research because these stories are important. If you agree, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it, especially young farmers being told that financing a $500,000 tractor is normal and necessary. Show them what happened when Raymond Bradshaw bought back that Farmall. Show them why the old man was right. Raymond Bradshaw died in 2003 at 89 years old. At his funeral, Kevin told a story about the Farmall and the 4230. He told it with humor and love and gratitude. My dad was the most stubborn man I ever knew, Kevin said. And that stubbornness saved our farm. He refused to finance equipment. He refused to let me finance equipment. He bought back a tractor I traded away before the sun went down. And he did it because he understood something I didn't. That staying out of debt is more important than looking successful. I spent my whole life farming, and I never made a loan payment on a piece of equipment. Not once. Because my dad taught me that financial independence is the foundation of everything else. And I'm teaching my son the same thing. What would you have done if you were Kevin? Would you have been angry when your father bought back that Farmall? Or would you have understood immediately why he did it? And if you were Raymond, would you have had the courage to override your son's decision, to risk the relationship, to be seen as controlling or old-fashioned? These aren't easy questions, but the answers determine whether farms survive or fail. Think about it. And remember, the newest tractor won't save your farm, but staying out of debt might. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.